Now, I'm in the bad books here already because I did no slides. Okay? And I'm going to explain why I did no slides. I have systemic lupus erythemus, which is an autoimmune disease, which I got when I was 13 years of age. And it took over 40 odd years for them to diagnose, 30 odd years for them to diagnose when I got very ill when I was in Queen's University, Belfast, and I keeled over, and I went from 10.5 stone to about 7 stone in the space of a few weeks. And they pumped me full of, because my heart was in a bad way, of steroids. And in a university, actually, there's very poor communication. So when I was I worked for PJ Hegarty's. So PJ Hegarty's would be the competition to BAM. Yeah. So it'd be the 3 big construction companies in the UK would be Sisks, where my father worked, PJ Hegarty's, where I worked, and BAM would be the competition. Okay? So that's why I'm laughing. We're all friends. We all love each other. And I suppose what it is, you know, I came out of the acute medical unit on a Friday evening after getting discharged, got into my car, drove 4.5 hours up the motorway and went in teaching on a Monday morning because the guy who was doing the teaching timetable was a black Presbyterian, is what they'd say in Northern Ireland. He didn't particularly like my accent, and I had 2 young children, and he had me teaching on a Monday morning and on a Friday afternoon. Okay, so that tells you everything you need to know where I started. Okay, so in terms of working class, I said both my parents, they left school at 13 years of age. My father was a Cooper carpenter, okay, 7th generation Cooper. They worked in the whiskey business. And my mum was a tailor, a lady tailor, okay. My mum actually, her writing skills weren't great, but my father was very, very bright. And when he was 13, my grandmother used to say to us when we were older, you know, when your dad left school, he was the eldest. My grandmother had about 13 children, 7 of them survived. The priest came down from the local school and said, you must leave Joe stay on. You must leave Joe stay on in school. He's a very clever boy. But that's not the way things were done. Okay, so my parents worked round the clock on Saturdays and Sundays, and they made lots of money, but I never saw them. My father would get up at 6:30 in the morning, he'd go away to work, and he'd come back in an evening, and he had a drink problem. So drink is a big thing with Irish people, and I know you laugh, but actually it goes back to the famine. Okay, so it's actually a genetic thing. It's a genetic mutation. So there's 2 things that happen with Irish people as a result of the famine. And that was Irish people have a lot of mental health issues related to bipolar issues. Okay, so that's the first thing. And that relates to the famine, because obviously if you have a huge population that's wiped out and then you have young children who immigrate or leave, are left alone in the country, their sort of psyche is very, very different. To put it in sort of the concept for people, or to contextualise it, it's like being on a boat and you've no food. And what happens is you get scurvy and a whole load of other things, and you actually go a bit bonkers. And that's what actually happened to Irish people. So that association and that name, the Fighting Irish, with Irish people who went to Boston and places like that, it's actually sort of prerogative. Okay? So there's a load of terminology and phrases that are used in the English language that people actually don't realise are quite prerogative to Irish people. So you'd hear it on the BBC News, you'd hear somebody say, beyond the pale. Okay? So that means that everybody outside of Dublin is a savage. So when people use that phrase, they actually don't know it's actually very discriminatory to an Irish person. Okay? So there's a whole load of things like that happen with Irish culture, and that's why Irish sort of make a joke or a laugh, and actually we sort of play into the caricature of it. So when Irish people came to the UK, my family came to the UK, World War I, World War II, they fought in the wars, the Boer War, all those wars, they've been all over the world. They were in the British Army and the Royal Navy. And I suppose my grandfather, he was in London here during the war, okay, and he got a British pension. My grandmother got a British pension. My parents would have been entitled to British passports because they were pre-partition. So this gentleman here said to me, he says, I'm thinking, I'm entitled to an Irish passport. Okay, so when I arrived in Manchester, everybody started telling me about they were applying for Irish passports. So to contextualise that, the population on the island of Ireland is about 7 million. And we could probably more than 10 times our population by just having people apply for passports over the last 2 generations. Okay? So in terms of myself, and I'll contextualise it, when I was in school, in primary school in Ireland, we were all segregated in our tables in the classroom according to your background. So if you were professional kids' children, you were on one table. If you were people who left school earlier age, you were on another table. And that predetermined your sort of direction in life. So social mobility in Ireland, like the UK, is actually very, very difficult for ordinary people from ordinary backgrounds. And what I've noticed, okay, as I went through life, people as they go socially mobile, in the academic world particularly, their accents change and they lose their working class accents. Okay, so that's the first thing. It's very hard to maintain a working class background, voice or accent in academia. Okay, in terms of, me then moving from primary school, so they sent me to the slow teacher. So they needed to employ a teacher for people who had, like, they couldn't, like dyslexia or whatever, I wasn't even diagnosed. We'll send her to the slow teacher. So you go out to the slow teacher and you'll be beaten up by the slow teacher, okay? Because obviously she was happy in her job, okay? And you would be victimised and you might get your head banged off the radiator, and that was the normality of the primary school that I had. But my parents worked very, very hard, and my mother decided she was going to give us an opportunity and pay for us to go to a private fee-paying school in Cork. So I'm from a working class background, I'm in a private fee-paying school. And back in those days, the fees were about £2,000, which was half of what it would cost to go to the university in Ireland, because fees in Ireland to go to university were £4,000. Okay, so this is back in the 80s. And I know. Yeah, I actually know. Okay, so in relation to that, it's very hard to juggle all of that social mobility. So when you go to secondary school, then I was discriminated against by the working class, the professional people in the school I was in. So they had opportunities, I didn't have opportunities. They were going on funny holidays and doing different things that I never experienced. Okay, so then when I went to university, okay, I had my health issues, I'm dealing with people. I was always an outsider looking in. I've never been anything but an outsider looking in. So coming to things like this, I get very anxious. Okay? For the full weeks before this and the build up to it, I'm actually quite nervous and I'm very anxious. I don't like meeting new people anymore. Okay? I sort of stick to my own little tribe, which is basically my little family unit. And I engage with people here, and it's all quite overwhelming. So I was editor-in-chief of Renewable and Sustainable Energy Reviews. And first of all is my name, so they don't know whether I'm a man or a woman, and a lot of people, they wouldn't even check it up. So when I was in industry, the first thing they tell you when you're in industry, will you make sure whether it's a man or a woman? Okay? Make sure, how do I address that person in an email? So over COVID, it's actually even become worse. You get emails from people now, students, people across all walks of life and everybody, and they just have down in the email, hi. So as a working class person, that wouldn't sit well with me at all. But it's quite the norm now, hi. No sort of anything to do with anybody. It's quite unprofessional. And nobody is training anybody up now how to be an actual human being. So we're going around ticking boxes about EDI, we're going around ticking boxes about how we support people, how we're meant to support people. But actually, do we really support people if we can't have an honest conversation? So they're the things that I struggle with. The fact when I moved to Northern Ireland, they just assumed when I was another academic cupping, I was coming from the Republic of Ireland, I knew how to get a bank account in the UK. I didn't have a clue. I knew how to get a national insurance number. I was explaining that last night, and another lady said to me, well, I got no help. And actually what I discovered is because she wasn't an academic. She was an administrator. And it was only by the conversation I discovered that. So all of these things play into the discrimination. The people who always most welcomed me actually were gay men. Because they understood, they obviously have so much going on in the way they treat, the way they're treated, the way they have to hold back on things. It's so difficult for them. And they were so kind to me. The reason why I left being working in industry and infrastructure, because I worked in infrastructure, was because basically I couldn't do the travel anymore because I was the carer for my parents. So my mother had multiple myeloma, my father had bowel cancer, and then he lost his sight. He was blind at the end, clinically blind. And over the last 10 or 12 years, that's what I was doing. I was minding my parents, holding down a job, and I went from lecturer to reader. When I went in to apply for senior lecturer, the guy, he's an Australian now, he was an academic. He'd moved from Imperial to Australia, back to Queen's University, Belfast. Then he's gone back to Australia again. He said to me, when I went into him, he said, who were you and what metrics would you have? And he was meant to be my head of school. Can you imagine? Isn't that shocking? Okay? Because he actually had never looked up what my metrics were, what boxes I ticked, what I had done or what I didn't know. He didn't even know who his own staff were. Obviously, that said it to me. And I said, that's no problem. I just walked away, I went out the door. I said, you know what, I'm not going to apply for a senior lecturer. I'm going to wait a year. I'm going to tick a few more boxes, because that's what they love, box ticking. And I'm going to apply for reader, and that's exactly what I did. Okay, is that all right? So I'm going to say to everybody, if you want to play the academic game and do it clever, you just rock up and tick all the boxes, and that's what a lot of people do. Whether it's successful or meaningful in the end, or beneficial for society, or sustainability, or for our well-being in at large as a community, that's what we need to ask ourselves. And they're the sort of questions that I ask myself as an academic. And I hope when I teach my students, and I hope when I train my PDRAs, that I encourage them to think laterally about the career moves they make and the decisions about how they engage with everybody. Okay? So we're actually very blessed that we get taxpayers' money to educate society and for it to grow. And we have to take that in. It's not just a game. It's an honour to be an academic. Okay? Thanks.